Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to our Young Muslim Q&A. So I wanted to welcome everyone and introduce myself. My name is Grace Song. I'm the Executive Director of the Usuli Institute. And I wanted to start by just giving a little bit of background about how we came together to do this Young Muslim Q&A, because at the end of the last khutbah we had, one of our visitors came up and asked some questions of the Sheikh about some of the messages that young Muslims have been getting on campus, in college, about marriage, about love, about romance, about dating, questions that are very common, I think, among young Muslims at large. And I my ears pricked up and I was like, well, you know, this is such an important question that I think we really need to have a session about it and record it so it's not just a one-on-one Q&A between someone after the khutbah, but that it becomes an opportunity for other people to ask questions that are important and weighing on people's minds. So we kind of did this very impromptu, like literally within a week. Not sure exactly who was going to be available to come because we're on break and stuff in between college, and plus it's flu season. So anyway, we have kind of a cozy group here. But I think the most important thing, we opened up a Google form questionnaire, so people were able to submit a lot of questions. And so I did get a good number of questions. A lot of them were very common, and some of them were a little bit too personal. So I felt like, you know, it was really important for us to sort of choose, with the time that we have, to focus on the questions that are kind of the most universal and the most pressing, I guess. So I hope that in the time that we have today, we can really focus on those things, but kind of also in the spirit of the Usuli approach to things. You know, I'm hoping that we can leave people with kind of the spirit of, you know, what maybe is important to think about when you're confronting questions about relationships and love and marriage and sort of, you know, those kinds of things, because people oftentimes, I think, get lost in the woods of what does the hadith say about this, what does the tradition say about that, and then try to navigate kind of in between the rules, as opposed to thinking about the spirit of the message. And that's kind of what we at Usuli, you know, generally try to do, is think about what are the principles that guide us, you know, as beautiful, loving beings of the divine, and how do we live up to that in everything that we do, not just in relationships, but everything else. So I hope that with that we can cover some of these really important questions today. And I'll share some of those questions to get us started, and then we can also open up to some of the people that are here. I think a lot of people you know, who wanted to come probably got hit with a flu bug or something like that, so I'll represent for them. But I also wanted to say that some of the questions that I got touched on things that the professor has already written about at length, talked about at length. You know, there are a lot of things out there on SoundCloud. For example, there's a whole halakha on marriage. It's like, I think, 8 to 10 sessions, and very, very valuable. And so a lot of, I think, this time should be spent trying to cover things that he hasn't already covered in other avenues, because that would just be repetitive, and there's so much beautiful stuff that's out there. Also, I think the book, The Search for Beauty in Islam, the Conference of the Books, also talks to the spirit of this and covers a lot of issues that have to do with how do you deal with parents who, you know, you're fighting with over issues, or, you know, attitudes in the community that are more focused on culture as opposed to religion. The beating verse, marriage, you know, other things that, and hijab. I mean, a lot of issues that are, you know, people are dealing with also among the youth. So that I would highly recommend. And of course, all of the halakas that we've been doing either before the Usuli Institute or at the Usuli Institute that really delve into the meaning of the Quran. So that, again, gives you so much foundational knowledge. But hopefully this session will be a source of reassurance and enlightenment and strength, and help people navigate with the spirit of, I think, the beauty that we try to teach. So with that, that's pretty much all I want to say. Let me, I have some questions here. So kind of, again, just to start with, like, the questions about dating, love, romance, marriage, intimacy, that kind of thing. So I'm going to step back and we'll turn the cameras and everything towards the professor, and then we will. So I think that let's start with dating. Scholars say today that there's a difference between Islamic courtship and Western dating. Courtship is engaging in a relationship with the opposite gender with the intention of marriage and the involvement of parents, while dating is two people spending time regularly and having a relationship as a result. And following this logic, dating is haram is dating haram and incompatible with Islamic values? You know, how should we think about like getting to know someone or dating or that whole topic?
First, I mean, labels are dangerous because the contrast when we talk about there is a Western way of doing things as opposed to any other way. I don't like this juxtapositioning because it's a juxtaposition of cultural paradigms, and attempting to fit Islam within a singular cultural paradigm is more an act of ideology and nationalism rather than an actual attempt to understand what the Islamic Sharia actually has to say. So, I mean, just juxtapositioning itself is flawed. I mean, is an arranged marriage in which kids never, where kids basically meet each other within the context of families that arrange the marriage and that are, you know, the more traditional type of paradigm of arranged marriage. Is that any more Islamic than any other form of marriage? No. I mean, that's not the limits, the parameters of what makes something Islamic is not the cumulative practices of a particular culture as opposed to another. So that's a really important starting point, because often we talk about, we use labels and we are, we don't carefully think about what these labels actually mean and are in fact conveying. And we assume that certain cultural practices are more Islamic than other cultural practices. That again is something that we need to be very careful about. I mean, I can make a very good argument that if the objective is to enter into a covenantal relationship, which a marriage is, it's a contract and a covenant, in which God is an intimate part of that marriage, in which you are effectively two people commit to each other in light of God's law and God's blessings, Allah's barakah, Allah's spirit as a fundamental part of that marriage. One can argue that an arranged marriage is actually not conducive to that. I guess it depends on what type of marriage you arrange. So it's not an issue of cultural practices. That's not the issue. If we step back, in marriage in which a partnership is thought out, so you are seeking to have a partner so that you can grow towards Allah, that you are growing in Allah, that you are actually coming together in order to add to each other as partners, so that you can live in a blessed relationship, blessed by Allah. That's the objective. And then the question is, how do we get there? How do we get there? The most obvious point is that you're not going to get there by means that anger Allah, or that break Allah's laws, or that alienate divinity and the blessing of divinity from your relationship. You get there by, in fact, pursuing means that are in themselves the blessed means. That ought to be the central question. That ought to be the central question. If you know your partner, the better you know your partner, the better you are able to understand your partner, the better you are able to engage your partner about how they understand life, how they understand the objectives of life, what they want to achieve with their existence on this earth, what they consider to be priorities or not priorities, whether even they do simple things like pray. How serious are they about prayer or about fasting? How willing, to what extent are they willing to sacrifice in Allah's way? Even the smallest things like how much of your income should be dedicated to sadaqah. Do they understand money as something that ought to be spent in Allah's way, or do they see, or are they rather cautious with money and conservative towards money? In other words, they believe in saving it and hoarding it and so on. All of these things, you're not often going to be able to get at within the context of a so-called arranged marriage, because an arranged marriage limits the amount of things that you can actually engage your partner about and converse about and inquire and investigate. The critical thing, though, are the risks involved in dating. Meeting with someone of the opposite sex for the purposes of marriage, meeting in public and engaging in public. What is the purpose of that? The purpose of that is to avoid khalwa. Why do you want to avoid khalwa? Because of the temptations that are inevitably that occur in khalwa. Khalwa is being basically with someone of the opposite sex alone, away from the eye of the public. Meeting basically behind closed doors, where a sexual encounter that can take place without, in other words, if you are tempted to engage in something unlawful, to engage in some type of sexual act, obviously, if we are in public, that is a deterrence than if you are in private. So the critical issue with dating is that you have a serious purpose of considering marriage in spending one-on-one time with someone. So that is a real. So you're not just engaging in some type of frivolous behavior where marriage is not, in fact, something that you're. Uh, and second is that you avoid situations of khalwa. You avoid situations in which the temptation of engaging in sexual relations would pose a serious threat. These are the parameters. Now, do arranged marriages work? All marriages can work or not work depending on the expectations of the partners. Arranged marriages among people whose consciousness and expectations are limited, who effectively are within a cultural context in which two families marry each other, not two individuals marry each other, they're going to have a far greater successful rate than marriages that where the families are not in fact getting wedded to each other but individuals. So in general, arranged marriages in Western societies, in societies like the United States, are pose a very serious problem because you're putting two strangers together, and often strangers that have not attempted to negotiate and match their expectations in a relationship. And then the families, once they put these two together and they engage in a marriage, the families often withdraw from the picture. And that ends up in a disaster. It's one thing if there are two people, a couple that marry, and the families are effectively responsible for these two financially and otherwise. So in other words, if they can't pay the bills, they can always count on their families to pay the bills for them. But if an arranged marriage, which often happens in the West, is that families get two together and then they say, off you go, make your way in life, and don't bother us if you're having problems paying your bills or if you are fighting with each other or so on. That doesn't work. So we're transplanting a cultural practice to a situation that is ill-adapted to accommodate it. I don't see an alternative in the context of Muslims in the West to, in the same way you negotiate a business deal very carefully, marriage is even much more so. You have an absolute obligation to try to the best of your ability to find out as much as you can about the spiritual, intellectual being that you're considering committing your life to. And so, once you put that label, dating, because I am one of those people, in Muslim countries, when you talk about dating is often thought of as something that the westernized high class do. And the westernized high class do because they're corrupt. And they are, it's a practice that has far more to do with social prestige and economic prestige than anything that has to do with marriage or so on. So using that label in the context of Muslims in the United States is dangerous because it's a completely different mechanism and a different social construct than the role it plays in the countries from which our parents, or most kids, their parents immigrated. You call it whatever you want, but it's a process of exploring and carefully investigating a partner in life. And that's not going to happen without serious conversation and time and energy committed. And it is the role of the families to try to facilitate and create safe spaces for these interactions to take place as much as they can, so that they can occur with the least amount of trauma possible, so that young people who are considering marriage can find out the type of information that is necessary for a marriage.
Okay, so let's take a step back, because honestly, I don't know to what extent families get involved in that. I know there are a lot of, if we just say you're a young person, presumably you perhaps are at college, you're interacting in a environment with a lifestyle or a context that maybe is very unfamiliar to your family. Let's say you come from an immigrant family. You have certain realities on the ground today, where everything from, Muslim dating sites to just classmates that you have in school, you're interested in people. We know that in the Islamic context, there's a lot of, like dating or meeting someone is the whole relationship between men and women is very taboo, right? So you're kind of growing up in this like, okay, stay away, men and women are separated, and then all of a sudden you hit marriage age, and then it's like you're expected to now know how to navigate dealing with the opposite sex in an Islamic context, whereas maybe you have a double life because in your non-Islamic context you actually can interact normally with people who maybe are not Muslim. If we take a step back and we just say, okay, we understand that young people today have a lot of conflicting challenges. They're dealing with a lot of issues, on the ground with living in a secular society, and, thinking about, maybe feeling a little bit disconnected from their Islamic part of their lives, because, if they go to the mosque, it's not, it's very cultural and not necessarily tuned in to what people are dealing with. How would you advise just young people with all the challenges that they're confronting, to navigate a lot of that? And even with the understanding, let's just start with a very basic thing. Okay, I want to know, how should I think about the person if I want to find a life partner? What are things that are important that I should be looking for? You've talked about the difference between a mulk or mundane marriage versus a malakut one, which is one based on serving Allah. How would you advise like kids, and maybe they don't feel comfortable talking to their families because their families are like, no, you have to marry of our same culture.
Yeah, okay, there's a lot, and I'm trying not to refer to things I've spoken about in the past, because
or briefly, we can also direct people like for more on that.
Okay, that distinction between a mulk and malakut marriage is very important. So people should go back and listen to these lectures, because I spent a lot of time on them. But okay, let's go back. I attended college here. I spent many years in universities here, and so I'm not talking about something that is unfamiliar to me culturally. And first we must say that our practices in Islamic centers and in a lot of our Islamic contexts is deeply flawed when we don't allow for the mixing of the sexes within Islamic context. And then the reality of life is our kids go and they interact with members of the opposite sex outside of the Islamic context. And the practical effect of that is that we see, especially among Muslim women, is that they meet non-Muslim men and they develop relationships with non-Muslim men, and they often, many of them, fall into that problem of wanting to marry non-Muslim men. And because they met them at the university or at their work or whatever, and because of the lack of experience in dealing with men generally, when they meet non-Muslim men, I mean, I so many cases over the years now, so many, so many. Um, in comes some guy that flirts with a Muslim woman, compliments her a few compliments, and she melts. And then the parents are, have a huge problem on their hands when their daughter comes and says, "Oh, I want to marry this individual who's not a Muslim." So we commit a crime against our young generations when we create a highly artificial interaction within our so-called Islamic context. And then we're shocked when we see what our kids eventually do when they're out there.
And this works for men going, Muslim men also towards non-Muslim women.
Well, yeah, I mean, we see a lot of Muslim men also, develop relationships with non-Muslim women, and that often happens in the context of schools or work or whatnot. And that's a very serious problem. I mean, you can't insulate your children from real life. It's not going to work. It just doesn't work. And we don't have real statistics, but we know that this is a very serious problem. And I am comfortable at this point of saying that every Muslim woman that marries a non-Muslim man, or every Muslim man that marries a non-Muslim woman, most of the time, in the vast majority of cases, the kids do not grow up Muslim. I mean, I've been around long enough to see hundreds of cases, and very, very rare for the kids to actually grow up in any way seriously attached to Islam. That's just the reality of it. And so that has to be something that we acknowledge and recognize.
So we know that most likely that is not going to change in the near term.
I mean,
in terms of like Islamic context and the separation of genders, and all of the people that are like don't want to go to the mosque anymore because.
Now, of course, the biggest challenge, and again, I went to school in the United States, so I've been through that experience. The biggest challenge is that when you make a commitment, and this is a commitment I myself made when I was an undergraduate, that I will not spend time one-on-one with any woman unless marriage. I mean, it's one thing if I'm spending time with the member of the opposite sex because we're working on a project, because we're, going out to see a movie as a group. There are 10 of us or 6 of us, or we go, but where there is privity in the relationship, I will not spend time in a private, intimate-like setting where intimacy can, in fact, arise. And I don't mean physical intimacy, I mean even emotional intimacy. Unless marriage was a serious proposition to be considered. And so it's one thing if I'm meeting with a woman in public because I am putting marriage as a consideration, or if I'm not putting marriage as a consideration. And if I'm not putting marriage as a consideration, then I avoided that context completely. So, and this is, I wish other people would do that. I mean, and I would implore them to follow that practice, in that because it was clear to me that I did not want to marry a non-Muslim, I never allowed for the opportunity to arise where I would meet in an intimate setting with a non-Muslim. Regardless of what would happen. I mean, I could meet someone that in which you know when there is sort of like a sense of intimacy that arises between you, where you meet in group and you like this person and that person likes you, but if that person that says, why don't we meet, for dinner, for lunch, for coffee, and I know that this is a follow-up to that initial feeling of intimacy, I would not accept. I would never accept, because I didn't want to put myself in that position where the more involved you are, the harder it becomes to resist. And yes, that meant taking a very hard position with yourself, but it was clear to me that I didn't want to allow for the opportunity for a relationship to arise in which I end up finding myself wanting to marry a non-Muslim. Why? Because I thought of the type of family that I wanted. It's not just about me and this other person, but about what type of family I'm going to have, what type of children I'm going to have. So then that limited sort of the, if you want to call it, the playing field to Muslims, which meant I went, as an undergraduate, I went to Yale, and at the time I went to Yale, there was literally a handful of Muslims at the time. So that really meant throughout my undergraduate years, I never went out with anyone. Because once you've limited yourself to Muslims, and there were no Muslims, so, but in hindsight, I think it was the wisest thing to do, because you are a human being, and as a human being, the more you open the door to develop upon initial, let's say, elementary feelings of intimacy, it's going to get harder and harder to turn away. And so you can't put yourself in a dangerous situation and then complain when the fire burns you. I mean, it just so avoid putting yourself in a situation where you could get burned in the first place. So this clarity about what type of family you want to build is really important. I mean, you meet someone who says, "Oh, I ended up going out with this guy or this woman who was an atheist." Well, that meant that there were many decisions, micro decisions, where you decided to go out with this atheist and spend more and more time. And the worst thing that tricks human beings is hopefulness. Oh, I'll go out and maybe eventually I'll convince this person to be a Muslim.
Yeah.
It's nonsense.
There's a lot of cases.
Yeah, a lot of cases. I mean, oh, well, let's just go with it. And then, if, do you have any, have you actually convinced anyone before to become a Muslim? I mean, and so what makes you think that it's going to work with
This guy.
this person,
Yes.
with a man or woman? And in the vast majority of cases, it doesn't work, and in the vast majority of cases, you end up with in a horrible situation. So in this society, as you know, by nature, I don't like dating apps. I'm very, in the same way I don't like technology. I just think that they're extremely gross. But I must say that there might be just a pragmatic solution that's necessary, where you actually try to find a Muslim partner.
So, just to interject, because my sense is that most people have not heard something like this before, that you should think sort of about your what kind of relationship that you want. You know, kids are young. I mean, you know, an 18-year-old going to college, maybe they're not ready for marriage, but they are still interacting with members of the opposite sex that they're finding interesting. They're not thinking about, well, you know, they find themselves attracted to someone, and they're not thinking that they're ready for marriage. And like, probably if it's someone who's not Muslim, like, it would be weird to say, well, I don't want to go out with you because I'm not considering you for marriage. You know, it's sort of awkward.
Well, you don't need to tell them that, but you need to tell yourself that.
Tell yourself.
You need to tell yourself that. And you really don't owe anyone any explanation for why you don't want to go out with them. No one is entitled to an explanation. And in fact, that should not be a subject of conversation, because I know a lot of people that, and especially Muslim women. I mean, all the stories that I know of, Khaled was Muslim women, where the guy asking her out, well, why not? Why won't you go out with me? Are you afraid of something? Are you scared of something? You know, why can't we just be friends? You don't owe an explanation to someone like that. And friendship is defined within what I consider to be the parameters of friendship, not what you consider to be. And my friendship is that we go out in groups, and that I don't create an intimate relationship with you in any context. One of the things that that often arises in this context, I mean, people should be aware that there is a very good reason that sexual relations out of marriage are not allowed, I mean, or haram, among them. And it's not just an issue of pregnancy or unattended pregnancy and so on. But people think that sexual relations before marriage will in fact equip them to have a better marriage, where in fact the reality is quite the opposite. The more experienced you are sexually, the more problematic it's going to be in your marriage when you have to commit to a single person. It is, and we can get into that if you guys want, but in fact, anyway, I'll leave that.
We should get into that.
Yeah, but let's see if
so, well, let's take a step. Let's kind of work our way through, because coming back to this thing, you know, like, I know you are a very strong person and you're disciplined, and you can tell yourself, I'm not going to have a relationship, I'm not going to meet someone in an intimate setting. But I would also probably assume the vast majority of people are not necessarily either aware that they should be that way, or are necessarily, you know, have enough experience to recognize that that's something that is a smart thing to do. So let's say you are entering college age, you are, you know, you're friends with a lot of different people. I mean, like, how would you advise, you know, like, your son or daughter, okay, you're going away to college now, you know, you're going to have friendships, you're going to meet people that you find interesting and attractive. Some may or may not be, you know, good partners for you, obviously. You know, like, how would you advise them entering a situation, navigating friendships versus not? And then also, if they decide that they are thinking about marriage or wanting to meet that special person, what are the qualities or what are the things that should be important to them, and Islamically especially, obviously?
I mean, first, for the first step in any, I mean, from the very beginning, even if you are going to college and marriage is a few years ago, marriage is the goal. If you want to have if I'm not saying every human being on the face of the earth should get married, but if you're gonna get married, then marriage should be the goal. And I would urge parents to support. It doesn't matter if your son or daughter want to marry early. You should support them. You should help them. In this society, there's nothing wrong with early marriages, and there is no reason we should avoid that. So that's first. But second, know yourself. I mean, this is the first step, is to know yourself. And I know that it's very hard when you tell that to young people, but if you don't know yourself, attempting to know yourself within a relationship with another will only result in a greater amount of confusion and dissatisfaction and restlessness and sometimes even resentment. So know yourself and know what is it that you want to achieve within your life. And I'm talking about people who care about God, because if you don't care about God, then I have nothing to say to you. Mm-hmm. So that's, I mean, I'm talking to this group of people that actually want to be good Muslims. If you say, well, being a good Muslim doesn't matter to me, then I'm not relevant to you. And anything I say is not relevant to you. So within that group of people that actually want to be good Muslims, know that an intimate partner, a partner in a relationship, is the most intimate thing that you do. That partner shares with you literally everything. And it is impossible to build a relationship, or not impossible, very hard to build a relationship with Allah, to grow close to Allah, if you are married to someone who doesn't help you in this process, is not an active participant in that process. So at the very least, someone that you can pray with, someone that can fast Ramadan with you, someone that can do that way, if you want to do dhikr, can participate in dhikr sessions with you. Someone who actually shares the values about what we do in life. It matters to us whether God is pleased with it or not pleased with it, whether it's haram or halal. Because if your partner is not speaking the same language of halal and haram, and that matters to you, then you've got a very serious problem. Then you're actually most of the time swimming against the current. Second, regardless of how infatuated you are with a person, once familiarity steps in, once you've had sexual relations and the novelty of the relationship is gone, what remains are the nuts and bolts of life. And the nuts and bolts of life, if you are not with a person who is spiritually compatible with you, life becomes very difficult to navigate. So, as a young person, if Islam matters to you, and if you want to be a good Muslim, if that is an objective for you, because if not, then there's very little there's no common language between us. Then you're out of the constituency of relevance. Do not put yourself in situations. I mean, in Islamic lingo we say situations of fitna. But what does that mean? It means do not put yourself in situations that are going to be harder to disentangle yourself from as you go along. So, do you interact with the opposite sex? Absolutely. Because it's an important part of your socialization and culture. But avoid situations in which you are going to be able to resist sexual temptation. All of us are human beings, and if you are alone with someone in an apartment, in any context in which people people don't have access to you, then you're not going to be able to resist the consequences of intimacy. And if you do commit an error and do something haram, it is never too late to repent and just say astaghfirullah and begin from start. I mean, it's not the end of the world that you've sinned, but it should never come easy to you to sin in the first place. Now, sin has consequences. It has consequences in that every time you sin, and I mean this in a very concrete way, there is a certain amount of barakah, a certain amount of blessing that is taken away from you. It affects even the aura that surrounds your body. It even affects the light that emanates from your body. So remember, and the more you sin, it's as if the more you let go of God's hand. If you imagine God is holding your hand and you start out your life as a child who's your Allah's hand is firmly in your hand, the more you sin, the more that grip, that divine grip on you is released. So, and the more you sin without tawbah, without repentance, the more there's scarring that is never healed. So you can't sin, and then say, why did I end up in an unblessed marriage? I mean, if you really believe in Allah, you will also believe that the more you exist in a blessed state, the more Allah will bring towards you a blessed partner. That less blessed you are, the more Allah leaves you to your own devices, to your own fate. And your own fate could be anything. Could be, anything out of all the variety that you run into in life. It's like a state of sanctification. What adds light and purity to us as human beings, to our auras? It's the closer we grow to Allah. The more we pray, the more we do dhikr, the more we fast, the more we give in sadaqah, the more blessed we are. The more we do things that is the opposite of that, the less clean our aura and the involvement of the divine in our life. So it's very important to just remember that sin has consequences. The other thing that sexual relations do, a lot of people think that sexual experience equals the ability to be nestled in a good relationship, when in fact, the more sexually experienced you are, the harder it is to be satisfied with a single relationship later on in your life. The more our psychology is exposed to alternatives, to varieties, if you will, the more difficult it gets to get our psychology to accept being satisfied with. So, I mean, to put it quite bluntly, divorce rates are very high in American society and in Western society generally, very, very high. Now, we don't pay attention to in what parts of society, what divorce rates apply to the different types of cultures that exist within Western culture. So, for instance, divorce rates are not that high among religious groups in the US that believe in virginal marriages. There are small groups of Christians and small groups of Jews that remain virgins until they get married. Divorce rates among these groups are not that high compared to the the mass of society which believes in dating and sexual relations before marriage. And among the reason that divorce rates are so high among those who date and have premarital sex is one of the main causes is cheating, which occurs at a very high rate among married partners. And why do people cheat? Frankly, they get bored. You're with one person for 20 years, 30 years. If your psychology has accepted the idea of options, choices, we get bored with the other human being we're with. It's always like, it's always like the first murder is the hardest. The first time you steal is the hardest. The first time you drink, that's the hardest. Once you've broken that barrier, it becomes it's infinitely easier to do it again. So people who've gotten accustomed to sleeping with someone outside the bonds of marriage, it's not that surprising that within a marriage they eventually start remembering this girlfriend and that girlfriend and this girlfriend or that boyfriend or this, or all the different, even the small things that they might have enjoyed with this partner or that partner or this partner that now with their current marital partner they don't have. So you get, unfortunately, even with some Muslims, I've there have been a lot of cases where you'll have a Muslim man, for instance, who've had sexual experiences before marriage, and then they end up marrying someone, and then eventually all types of problems arose. And then when I talk to them, they'll say something like, well, I had a girlfriend before I got married, and my current wife doesn't do oral sex. So is it a small thing? But it's a small thing, but it's a huge thing at the same time. Because now that's very different than someone who actually did not have any marital experience before, any sexual experience before. Something like what my wife does or doesn't do does not play the same role at all. And I often, it's again, once your psychology been introduced to the act, it is very difficult to reverse it. So just keep in mind for all these young people that are out there, what we call sin, everything has a long-term consequence. In fact, I'll even say it in my own language. People don't realize that every time you have sex with someone, there is not just an exchange between your cells and their cells. In our modern day and age, we'd say things like, you can find seminal fluids or whatever. But there is an exchange of cells. But there's also an exchange of auras. And the aura of someone that you have sex with remains with you. Actually, you don't get rid of it for at least a year. And the more you have sexual partners, we see with our own eyes a very limited, something like it's a very small percentage of the light spectrum. Right? We see a very narrow part of all this physical existence. But if you expanded your light spectrum so that you could see energy waves that surround a human being, this is what we call auras. They're colors and energy waves. You would see the consequences of acts in very material and physical ways. Now, if you can visualize that in your imagination and say, okay, there's this momentary pleasure that I might engage in, but am I prepared for the spiritual damage, the psychological damage, the alteration of my relationship with Allah as a consequence of that? And if you remind yourself of the numerous consequences that follow, it might be that you become more cautious, so you don't put yourself in that position. I mean, I'll even be more blunt. When I was an undergraduate, because I would not go out and date, I had a friend who it happened to be he was Jewish, and he ended up meeting someone at Yale. They ended up getting married. Anyway, him and his, at that time, girlfriend, fiance, whatever you want to call her, they found each other. Anyway, they became convinced that they wanted to set me up on a date, because they thought that once they found out I'm not gay, because first they thought maybe I'm gay, and then once they found out I'm not gay, they thought it's just not right that I don't go out on a date. And they found someone who liked a lot of things. That she read a lot of the same literature that she liked the same poets, and and they asked me to go out with them on a dinner and a movie, and didn't tell me they were inviting this woman, and then they invited this woman. She was there at dinner, and they basically were trying to fix us up. And at that point, I actually eventually had to have a very serious conversation with them, that it's because I like this person that I don't want to go out with them anymore. Not because I didn't want to go through the risk of trying to convince this person to become a Muslim. It's not fair. I mean, it's not even fair to that woman. And I told her this, I said, unless on the very first date, I told her, you must know that it is my long-term plan to convert you. And he said, well, if you say that, she's not going to go out with you. I said, precisely. And so I'm not going to be unfair. It's immoral. And I'm not going to lie to her and pretend that I don't want to convert her. And So, does it pay off? It pays off in your relationship with Allah. I mean, as a result, Allah has always been an intimate part of my life. Did I entertain the possibility that I would remain a loner all my life and never get married? Yes. But I had acclimated myself to the idea that whatever Allah wants for me, I will accept because of my relationship with Allah. Now, was it difficult? Absolutely, it's difficult. You need to be honest with yourself, because I liked that woman, and I knew that if I continued to see this woman, eventually, the minute there is any type of one-on-one relationship, there will be temptations that are very hard to resist. And I didn't want the lack of tranquility and lack of peace and the lack of barakah that would come from angering God. And so, I've continued to be in some form of correspondence with this woman for years. I mean, we became friends, but never put ourselves in a situation that becomes risky. Including excluding the possibility of girlfriend, boyfriend, that type of thing. I would underscore that while as a Muslim, just simply leaving marriage to your parents, they'll find me a wife that they fix me up with. I'm not going to tell them that that's wrong. I mean, if that's what's going to work for you, that's fine. But for the majority of people, they're lying to themselves if they say that that's what is going to make me happy, because you are a person that epistemologically, in terms of your psychology, your system of knowledge, is very different than your parents. Your expectations of life are very different than your parents. Take responsibility for finding a partner by actively searching for someone that is compatible and that shares the same goals with you. The more that person shares your understanding of the boundaries of your relationship with Allah, the more successful that relationship is going to be. For those who don't think sin is a big deal, I have nothing to tell them. I mean, there's no way I can convince them, because if they don't really believe that sin changes your aura, or that sin alters your relationship with Allah, or that barakah is an element in a human's life, there's no way you can communicate with them other than to say, may Allah help you in your path, whichever path you see.
Okay, so let's then say, I think that like what you said is so powerful. So now let's say you've now convinced people to put on their spiritual armor and say, okay, I do want to be a good Muslim. I do want to choose wisely. When you and I first met, you told me that there were certain criteria that Islamically that the jurists suggested people should prioritize when they're choosing a partner. So can you advise then young people, okay, you've decided you're going to choose wisely, now you are interested in marriage, what are the things that should be at the forefront of your mind?
Well, okay, in the Mumkam Nakut halakas, I talk about the juristic criteria, but I don't want to talk about the juristic criteria. But now, let's talk about the. No, I just don't want to go through the.
Let me just touch upon what they are, and then
so,
if they want more detail, they can go find them.
First thing, in my opinion, is you have to exert an enormous amount of effort to know yourself. And work on yourself, because part of the biggest, one of the biggest challenges in a marriage is that you, in a courting period, you represent yourself in a way that often, after a relationship takes course, might come back to haunt you, to bite you in the butt. In other words, if you're not honest about yourself and honest about the way you represented yourself. So, for instance, let's take something. Let's say you part of who you are is that you're stingy, and you conceal that part in the courting period. Well, within a marriage, the sense of betrayal about the way you represented yourself in the courting period, there's an enormous amount of resentment that grows, and that grows out of that sense of betrayal about the difference between the way you represented yourself in the courting period and the way you ended up being in an actual relationship.
Can we take a step back though, about the courting period?
Yeah.
What is the courting period? Like, let's say you see someone that you are intrigued by. How would you even, like...
No, but, so, wait, because first you were asking me about the criteria.
Okay.
So I was just saying, first it's this issue of know yourself to the extent possible, scrutinize yourself. so that you can be as honest about yourself as you can as you choose a partner, and so that you can also work against your own failures as a human being. So if you recognize that you have a problem with controlling your temper, or you have a problem with being impatient, or you have a problem with lack of sensitivity, or you have a problem with stinginess, you owe it to your, out of Islamic fairness and justice, you owe it to that person who's going to end up being committed to you, that you work to make yourself a better human being, and that you are honest in disclosing your shortcomings as a human being. So, okay, second, for someone who wants the path of Allah, religion ought to be, before even physical compatibility, before any other thing, religion ought to be a high priority. How important, and not just, and I don't, not just iman, but the understanding of Islam. Because I've seen a lot of marriages where someone who is, more, let's call it, I don't like words like liberal, but more reform-oriented, marries someone who is more Wahhabi-like. And they're clashing before you know it, they're clashing on everything. I mean, so even making sure you're understanding of, or if someone is Shia and someone is Sunni, how important is it to you that this person, these differences in madhahib are, but piety, that sense of that commitment to saying, the reason I am going to be fair to my husband or to my wife is because Allah is a fundamental part of the relationship, is very important. Because a lot of people, the only thing that might prevent your partner from cheating on you, cheating in a relationship, or being unfair in a relationship, or working to improve it, often is the role of Allah in a relationship. I mean, in other words, there are a lot of husbands and wives that love is often not a sufficient deterrent. So who the person is religiously is critical. For me, I don't put much weight on race, I don't put much weight on ethnicity, I don't put much weight on culture. I know there are a lot of people who think cultural compatibility is very high, ethnic compatibility is very high. Personally, I think all of that is nonsense. I think if you have iman and you have love, all these cultural differences can become meaningless. That not everyone agrees with that, but in my experience in life, I have seen iman and love conquer everything else. Now, after iman, if you don't love the person, then ending up in a relationship with them is unjust. Because it is love that makes you overlook all types of annoyances in a relationship. Human beings, when they end up in a relationship, will annoy each other. It's just inevitable. And that's because we have egos. And our egos have habits. And our habits will clash with the habits of other human beings. That's the way Allah has made us. Each one, we are very unique as individuals. It is only love that will make you not focus on the ways that your partner irritates you. So, if there are a lot of situations where, especially young people, they're not even sure if they love someone, and they say, well, something is better than nothing. I think that's fundamentally unfair, because eventually what comes out in a relationship is the worst of you, not the best of you. All of us as human beings, we have versions within ourselves. We have the worst of us and the best of us. And the worst of us, let's say, is like the shaitani part, the demonic part. And the best of us is the angelic part. Whoever you end up married to has to be a person that brings out the most angelic part of you, not the most demonic part of you. And that occurs with the presence of love. Beyond iman and love is it's truly the only thing that things like someone would say, marry someone attractive. Well, love is what makes you see someone as attractive or not. There are a lot of people who are married, and I see the person they're married to, and in my eyes, they're the ugliest person I've ever seen, and in their eyes, they're beautiful, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's love that wires your brain in a certain way that you see the beauty rather than the other side. These are the most important criteria. I mean, to be in a relationship without thinking seriously about iman is a huge failure. And without thinking about love is a huge failure. And without thinking about them both is a huge failure.
Can you just elaborate a little bit when you say
Don't make sure we don't miss Maghrib, by the way.
Oh, what time is it?
It's like 20 minutes to Isha time, so you have like 20 minutes.
Okay. So
Isha
let's just do this quick. Just a clarification on iman, because some people will be like, oh, he prays, he fasts, she wears hijab, so she must have iman. I mean,
if that is your iman, again, everything is compatibility. If that is your iman, then it might be sufficient. Let me put it this way: if you pray and your partner doesn't pray, remember that without prayer, a major part of barakah is not present. So you are ending up in a household in which there are various portals open to shaitan, because half of the household doesn't pray, assuming there's no children and you're just husband and wife. It's I'm not going to tell you it's haram to do it, but I'm going to tell you it's a huge risk to do it if you're going to marry someone that doesn't pray. Now, iman, to put it very bluntly, is the love of Allah, that you love Allah. A weaker form of iman, that you are afraid of Allah. You have to, what is the iman acceptable for you? Is your relationship to Allah based on fear? Then you're probably going to be attracted to someone else who has that type of relationship. If it's based on love, it's going to be very hard being married to someone whose iman is based solely on fear. Because you're going to find all types of incompatibilities. I can't say any fast and hard rules, but I'm just going to say that that's the reality of the situation. If you do your prayer, and your prayer is just a form of like a military salute to Allah, basically, something that you do out of a duty, and it would be beautiful for you to marry someone that can actually elevate your prayer. But so iman is a meaningful relationship with Allah. And the more meaningful the relationship with Allah, the more blessed your relationship and blessed the household that you are in will be. It's literally, it's like you walk into a place and you can feel whether that place has a barakah or gives you the creeps. Sort of makes your what do you call it?
Your skin crawl.
Skin crawl. Barakah is very much the presence of the divine. Now, I'm not speaking. Everything is in relationship to who you are as a human being. If basically what I do is I do my salah, and most of the time I don't concentrate my salah, then it is to be expected that that's the person that you're going to end up with. Should you aspire for more? You should always aspire for more, but you should never go less. So don't end up with someone who doesn't even pray at all. At a minimum. Now, of course, the question I always get is, well, it's so hard, it's so difficult to find partners in the Muslim context. If you have a relationship with Allah, you also believe that it is in Allah's hands. In the same way, whether you have a job or you have a salary, or that Allah, if Allah wants you to end up with a partner, Allah will send a partner. But do your due diligence. If you just marry someone that your parents bring to you and say, here it is, and then you're disappointed in the marriage because this person ends up to not have your understanding of iman at all, blame yourself, because like marriage, like everything else, requires due diligence and requires a level of juhd, a level of exertion for Allah to reward your hard work. If you don't put hard work into a relationship, and hard work comes from getting to know a person and to try to find that great blessing of love between you and a human being before marriage. That's where the hard work is. And to be honest with yourself, whether that you have love or you have lust or you have some other form of attraction, because love is blessed, but the other is not necessarily so.
Okay, let's break.
I'm not sure I'm saying anything useful at all.
It's very useful
No,
in
it's
my opinion.
wonderful. I think it's incredible.
I think other people talks about this stuff. Other like scholars or
You should let these guys ask questions when
Okay, we'll come back.